Before we address the characteristics of the various Jewish sects that existed in late Second Temple Judaism, we need to give some consideration to the theological problem that faced all of these sects. First, we need to go back to consider the reality of the divine promises in Israel's understanding of its life and identity. Remember that in the Old Testament we have, among others, the Abrahamic covenant, which has the promise of a land for Israel, a land of promise or land of milk and honey. The promise too to Abraham that God will provide progeny, and of course many progeny, and the promise to Abraham that his descendants will be a source of blessing to the nations, illustrating in Genesis what is really the vocation of Israel, not to be chosen simply for their own sake, but to serve as a means of redemption, a means of bridging the gap between God and humanity entirely. We also, though, have in the Old Testament accounts the Davidic covenant, in which we learn that David's dynasty is to endure forever. I want to recall, too, the cardinal points of Jewish theology. First, monotheism, that there is one true God, that there is one true people of this one true God, namely the idea of election, the people of Israel as the chosen people, and there is one future for all of the world, the question of eschatology. And for many Jews in late Second Temple Judaism, the conviction was that the future was not far away when the true God would reveal himself to all the world, defeat evil, and rescue his chosen people. Remember, too, that the exile to Babylon of the Jewish people, with the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem and the laying waste of all the land, and actually two conquests that followed on the conquest of the northern kingdom of Israel, so we're talking now about the exile of Judah, produced really a theological revolution in Jewish thought. What had been a faith connected with the royal court of David now is to find a new way to be Jewish, a new way to express faith and understand God's actions in the world and presence to the people. So, for example, an important question was, if God has given us a land and we are a people of the land and now we're out of the land, how do we relate to God? And so there has to be the understanding now that the Lord travels with the people, who is not confined to the land or the temple. We also have the trauma continuing in that after the promised return to the land, the hoped for restoration of a Davidic golden age doesn't take place. And not only does it not take place, but Israel, or Judah in this case now, the Jewish people, will endure a series of conquerors. They never quite achieve the degree of independence they hoped for, and certainly not the degree of domination or glory that they remembered from that golden age. And they experience great oppression in a variety of ways under a variety of oppressors, the latest, of course, by Jesus' day, being the Romans themselves. Another factor here we have to take into account is the witness of the prophets, which speak really of a time when God would vindicate his people. So, for example, theologically speaking, in Jesus' day, in late Second Temple Judaism, people would have remembered that the Zechariah's promise of 10 men, one of every nation, coming to faith has not yet been fulfilled. Or, for another example, the Lord had not yet taken his stand on Mount Zion and defeated all of the nations that opposed Jerusalem. Ezekiel's temple had yet to be built with its rivers of healing water flowing out to make even the Dead Sea fresh. So recall that even though obviously there is a temple in late Second Temple Judaism, that temple is not the glorious temple that people hope for, and certainly not the eschatological temple described by Ezekiel. And furthermore, it's a temple occupied by a leadership that is viewed as illegitimate by many of the Jewish people of Jesus' day. And finally, another great example would be that of Isaiah, whose vision of comfort, forgiveness, and peace and prosperity has never come near fulfillment in the post-exilic period. And so there are many Jews, especially the Pharisees, who are still waiting for these events to unfold in accord with the Scriptures. There's a sense for the people that they remain, in some sense, already or still in exile. The scriptures, in fact, speak clearly and powerfully of a time when all of this is going to be put to right. So we're not talking here about picking out a passage here or there, but rather a fundamental theme found in Scripture, that the Lord is in fact bringing all of history to an appointed conclusion, and that that conclusion will involve deliverance for Israel. And so for Israel, there is the conviction that God does keep God's promises. God will uphold his side of the covenant, he will vindicate the people, and the whole world will come to recognize the one true God and his one true people. So the heart of the question, really theologically speaking, for late Second Temple Judaism is that a gap exists between the promises that God has made, whether we be speaking of the covenants or the promises of the prophets, and the dismal reality in which people find themselves ruled over by what seems to be an unopposable and insurmountable foe, the great Roman Empire. Now, of course, these are ancient people. They're not going to blame God for these circumstances, and so they're going to hold to the conviction that God's promises are true, that that vindication will come. The theological question here concerns what Israel has to stop doing or what Israel must do, or maybe both, in order to bring about that divine deliverance. So if God is going to keep his end of the bargain, it must be that the people are somehow failing on their side. And the question then is how to remedy that in the hopes that God will then intervene in human history and deliver the people. And so, in fact, all of the sects of late Second Temple Judaism, including in this case Christianity, have to grapple with these questions. And as we look at those sects, we'll talk a little bit about the answers, the theological answers they come up with for this very theological problem.